This is our last lesson of Unit 6, and we're going to take a look at three Supreme Court cases of the early federal government, all of which happened under Chief Justice John Marshall. Remember, the Supreme Court has 9 justices or judges, 1 Chief Justice, and 8 Associate Justices. And it's basically none is more powerful than the other. It's just the job of the Chief Justice, basically, to keep the court. It's more of an administrative function. What we need to know about the Marshall Court, or the tenure of John Marshall, since he was Supreme Court Chief Justice for 34 years, were that the decisions that came down under his tenure significantly strengthened the power of the federal government. Let's take a look at 3 examples of this. There were a number of others, but these 3 you need to know for the New York State Regents exam. First case we're going to look at was decided in 1803, and it's called Marbury versus Madison. All right, most of the facts of the case are a little bit complicated. Here we have John Adams, and the night before Thomas Jefferson was going to be sworn in as president, John Adams, a Federalist. Remember, Jefferson was a Democratic Republican, so we're going to have a change in political parties here. In any event, John Adams was signing commissions to other Federalists for various government jobs. All right, Congress, through the Judiciary Act of 1789, had expanded the powers of presidents, giving the president the power to sign certain commissions or appointments. So John Adams was filling certain federal government jobs with like-minded Federalists the night before he was to leave office. He left the commissions on his desk, so when Jefferson came in the next morning, he essentially threw them out, because Jefferson would want to put people into these government jobs that were Republican thinking, in other words, his people. All right. One of the commissions which was thrown out was William Marbury's commission. So he sued Secretary of State James Madison, Thomas Jefferson's Secretary of State, demanding that he be given his commission, his government job. The court did something very interesting in its decision. It did something that the Constitution didn't give the court the power to do. It said in its ruling that Congress never had the authority to expand the president's powers. In other words, the Judiciary Act of 1789 that had done just that should never have been written, should never have been made law, and the court declared that law to be unconstitutional. Therefore, it was null and void. So what the court did by doing this, you can see here, was it created a job for itself that we call judicial review, the power to declare laws unconstitutional. Now, getting back to the story, William Marbury is not going to get his commission because, according to the court, the president never had such authority to sign commissions. All right. What's interesting here, Thomas Jefferson is not going to quibble, because essentially he won. Not that he was going to be able to pick his own people now, but he didn't have to put these folks who weren't from his political party into jobs. Congress doesn't say too much about it, so the result is that this stands, and the court itself dramatically increased its powers, and the court has been using the power of judicial review ever since. All right, and sometimes not sometimes, with tremendous effect. All right, declaring laws unconstitutional, constitutional or not, I should say, deciding on the constitutionality of laws. In any event, let's move on to the next case. Here we have McCullough versus Maryland. All right, this issue involves the National Bank. The National Bank had several branches, all right, one of which was in Maryland. So you have the state of Maryland who now wants to tax the Bank of the United States, at least the Baltimore branch. All right, the bank refused to pay the state of Maryland tax, and now we are going to court. All right, you can see here Maryland sues McCulloch for failing to pay the taxes. All right, Supreme Court is going to rule here in another Marshall Court opinion. First of all, they're going to clear up the question that had been lingering for a number of years, that being whether or not the government had the authority to begin with to create the national bank. And you can see here that they ruled that the national bank was legal. Congress had the power through the Elastic Clause to create the national bank. All right, but they're going to go a step further than that, and they're going to they're going to state that the federal government is supreme over the states. All right, as such, a state cannot tax a federal agency. All right, so they're reiterating here the supremacy of the federal government over the states. All right, finally, our last case involves two ferry companies on the Hudson River here in New York. All right, and we can see here Gibbons versus Ogden. All right, one was given exclusive right to operate steamship ferry service on the Hudson River by the state of New York. The other one was given exclusive right to operate steamship ferry service on the Hudson River by the federal government. We're going to have a problem here with both ferry companies claiming exclusive right to operate on the Hudson. This drawing, if this is supposed to represent Lower New York Harbor, it's poorly drawn, but we get the idea that it was a busy harbor, and of course there weren't bridges there yet, so certainly ferry service was going to be both important and lucrative, which is why this case is going to end up in front of the Supreme Court. The court is going to rule very simply here that the federal government has the power to regulate interstate commerce. Keep in mind that here in the lower Hudson River, one side of the river is New York State, and the other side of the river is the state of New Jersey. So as long as that ferry is bouncing back and forth across the river, it is conducting interstate commerce, and the federal government has purview over interstate commerce. Right? Congress, specifically in the Constitution, has the power to regulate interstate commerce. So New York never had the authority to issue the ferry service. So in all of these cases, plus several others that we didn't look at today, the decisions of the Supreme Court under Chief Justice John Marshall greatly expanded the power of the federal government. That brings us to the end of the unit.